When making the Noob Stomper video last month, I got a bunch of comments asking me to talk about the flip side, champions that suck in low elo but excel in high elo. Problem is, there's no actual term for the inverse, like there's no such thing as a pro stomper, but in any case, just as there are champions with a proportionally better time in lower ranks as opposed to upper ones, there are also champions that have an easier time finding success at higher ranks while being less effective down in low elo for one reason or another. To be honest, I'm surprised the idea never crossed my mind until I read the comments. For the most part, the factors that contribute to Noob Stompers are more cut and dry, naturally resulting in a more predictable video. Meanwhile, a number of things can influence what makes a champion better in Diamond, Master, Grandmaster, Challenger, and to a lesser extent Pro Play. When you take everything into account, the number of champs with increasing win rates and pick rates the higher up you go far exceed the number of champions to the contrary. So for the sake of thoroughness, in today's video, we'll be discussing high elo champions and how they differ from their Noob Stomper counterparts. Properly contextualizing what high elo is for the sake of argument, I know I always say this, but it really comes down to everyone's own interpretation, with much of that having to do with relative perspective. League players had this weird tendency to view anything under them as low elo because of this. For instance, Platinum players consider Gold to be low elo, Emerald players consider Platinum to be low elo, Diamond players think Emerald is low elo, Master thinks Diamond players are trash, Grandmaster thinks Master players are trash, Challenger to Grandmaster, and even High Challenger to Low Challenger. For the purposes of this video, what I consider to be low elo are Iron, Bronze, Silver, Gold, mid elo is Platinum, the new Emerald rank, and Low Diamond, while Diamond 2 and everything above that is high elo. As mentioned before, in contrast to Noob Stompers, whose reasons for being strong pretty much amounts to taking advantage of lower game knowledge and awareness, high elo champs are such for a wide range of factors. It could be macro-mechanical, micro-mechanical, it can be game knowledge, or it can even come down to player attitudes, and psychology does have an impact on champion perception. That's the whole basis of why no one plays. There's like one or two shared kind of general characteristics of high elo champions though. For those who didn't watch the Noob Stomper episode, which I highly recommend you do after this one, the basic gist of that group is that the average player down in Gold and below are usually unaware of how and when a Noob Stomper can be exploited and shut down, making them appear stronger or more overpowered than they actually are. Naturally, in high elo, where players have a better understanding of fundamentals and matchups, they can no longer get away with abusing the enemy team's lack of experience. In other words, Noob Stompers do well in low elo by capitalizing on players not knowing how to exploit their one or two critical weak points that make the difference between them 1v9ing the game or being completely useless. That sort of dynamic is what affects high elo champions too, only in this case, it's not exclusively about matchup checking, though that is still present. It's how responsive the champion is to external circumstances, whether they can still do what they want to do in spite of them. I guess in more simple terms, high elo champions are such due to their ability to basically not give a damn about what happens around them. They can still do their job. With that said, things can fluctuate based on current meta, balance, and once again player perception, so the list of high elo champs is ironically more subject to version by version changes than Noob Stompers, but there are some routine members of each role. By the way, I should specify that just because I don't mention a champion doesn't mean they aren't part of this group. Up in top lane, arguably the most famous examples of high elo champs are the four horsewomen of top lane, Fiora, Irelia, Camille, and Riven. Again, balance of whatnot may shift things in their favor or against it, but these four champs are perennial staples, consistently maintaining a position where every top laner in Diamond 2 Plus is both expected to know how to play at minimum one of them and more importantly, be ready to take on any of them. Each horsewoman varies in playstyle and function, but they share the same core traits. They're among the most difficult champions to fight head-on in a 1v1 duel. They're extremely mobile, especially in combat, making them exceptional at gap closing on priority targets. They have defensive tools that, while situational, can bail them out of otherwise fatal instances. They have a serviceable, if not strong laning phase, and incredible late game DPS. Fiora, Riven, Irelia, and Camille have earned their reputation as the four horsewomen as a result of their constant presence. There is never a period of time where at least one of them isn't strong. I can't remember the last time all four of them have been weak in Masters for years. Aside from them, two of the big time ones are Jace and Gangplank. The jungle is hands down the most notorious when it comes to high elo stompers. Frequent flyers of this role are Rek'Sai, Kindred, Nidalee, Bel'Veth, yes, even after she got nerfed a billion times. Rengar, quite possibly the most high elo champion to ever exist. Kha'Zix is another one, although he doesn't do too badly in low elo either. While tanks and bruisers dominate low elo, assassins and skirmishers run rampant up in high elo. Junglers are better at making the most out of the early game. They fight a lot more counter jungle virtually every game. They're also a lot better at tracking and predicting enemy jungle movements and responding accordingly, whether they're stealing topside camps after seeing them botside or snagging Rift Herald while they take Dragon, giving them more overall gold and experience per minute, which allows carry junglers to snowball into mid game more effectively. Mid lane is reminiscent of jungle. You'll find many more aggressive feast or famine picks, especially those with good roaming and skirmishing potential. Talon, Kiana, Nafiri, LeBlanc, Zoe, Akshan, Cassiopeia, and Kassadin are also pretty good. And even though Yasuo and Yone have measurably higher pick rates in low elo, their win rates are better in high elo. For bot lane, it's primarily AD carries with higher mechanical skill requirement. You'll find Xayah, Draven, Aphelios, and Kalista appear more frequently with significantly higher win rates to boot. Support is a bit different though. The ones that do well are those who perform better with a more coordinated team and or those who can get more stuff done across the map. For example, Bard is trash in Gold and below, but up in Masters Plus, he's one of the best supports in the game thanks to his situational utility and roaming potential. Rel is extremely popular at the highest level of play because people are faster to execute on rotations and engage, which is the one weak point of her kit, that she isn't very lenient on her follow-up timing. In High Elo, top jungle, mid, and bot players opt for a more self-sufficient champion pool with picks that don't care about what their team or the enemy team has. As for supports, they make use of the average skill level of players being sufficiently high enough to better capitalize on any openings and opportunities they provide. I know that comes off as a bit contradictory. Some champions are better because they don't have to worry about inconsistency, while other champions are better because players are on average more consistent. So let's categorize things a bit. The principal element of a high elo champion is obviously their capacity, what they can do and how much of it they can do. This is often accompanied by an obvious condition, decision making. Mechanically speaking, someone like Garen is very easy to learn. There's not that much nuance into his gameplay in terms of combos and applications. That also means he can't do a whole lot. Conversely, Fiora takes longer to pick up since you have to be aware of how to position yourself with lunge to both avoid attacks and be in a favorable spot to deal damage, when and how to use riposte, and general target selection, which plays a crucial role in how much pressure you can exert. In exchange, Fiora can do a lot more than Garen can. She's a far more effective split pusher, her mobility allows her to traverse the map in more ways than Garen can, she can play either front to back or flank the enemy backline and double as an assassin. She has the capacity to do more things, but the player has to know and decide on what option to take. For Garen, he can only do so much, but that can also be a good thing since, if nothing else, he can be a giant meat shield for your team and maybe take someone down with him with his ultimate. Fiora, on the other hand, can either be this destructive force of destiny or be completely worthless. She can't body block for your team, nor does she have any conventional crowd control. In addition, while both scale pretty well late game, Garen scales passively while Fiora scales actively. What makes tanks and bruisers passive scalers compared to carries who are active scalers? Passive scaling means the champion over time will simply just get stronger. Whether they do or don't get fed, a Mumu, Maokai, Ornn, what have you will still retain their intrinsic value in the form of their engage, lockdown, and overall durability. The positive consequence of this is that an 0-5 tank will still be useful to their team provided they're at least maintaining good CS margins and aren't 3 levels behind everyone else. But that's offset by them being unable to take advantages as far as an active scaler. So if we use ranges, Malphite hangs between an 80 to 120 range, and thanks to players in low elo not knowing how to consistently shut him down, he hangs around 100 to 120% more often than the reverse. Active scaling means the champion will not get stronger over time unless the player does something. The negative consequence of this is that an 0-5 Riven, Fiora, Irelia, or Camille will be pretty much useless without any external aid. Even if they have crowd control or token utility, the bulk of their contribution comes from damage, and without items, they don't do damage. However, the positive consequence of this is that if they do have items, they can take it much further. So someone like Kiana may have a low range of 50, but her high is 150, and high elo players are better and more consistent at finding ways to score kills and build a lead to then 1v9 the game. In essence, for Noob Stompers, the onus falls on the opposing team to shut them down because they will get strong no matter what. That's why tanks, bruisers, mages, and matchup checks like Nocturne, Alawi, Fizz, and whatnot dominate the meta down there. For high elo champs, the onus falls on the player and their team to take their abilities and build an advantage in the hopes that said advantage bears more fruit than a passive scaler. That's why assassins, skirmishers, and early gamers like Draven, Renekton, Nidalee, and Rek'Sai are more prevalent. Now, just because a high elo champion depends more on the one piloting them to be good or bad doesn't mean they can completely ignore who they're up against. You may have noticed that some early game champs are Noob Stompers while other early game champs are high elo. Likewise, some hyper carries are Noob Stompers while others are high elo. So how are you supposed to know who belongs to what? That's where the other determining factor comes into play. High elo champions also tend to be resistant to enemy responses to shut them down, either through their own devices or their teams. Fizz is a very dominant Noob Stomper, but is one of the weaker assassins in high elo since he's vulnerable for a decently long time after exhausting Playful Trickster compared to Talon, Kiana, and LeBlanc, who can situate themselves to not be in danger after burning their combo. All three of them have some way to poke you in neutral and buy time to restore their cooldowns. Kiana can hide under stealth, Talon can wall hop, LeBlanc can cut you with distortion. They can take proactive measures to keep themselves safe until their cooldowns come back up, while Fizz kind of can't. Renekton's an early gamer that does well in high elo because he can force checkmate situations thanks to his good wave clear, strong trade combo, and amazing tower diving strength, compared to a Mundo who's also lane bully but doesn't have that much kill pressure unless you're stupid enough to try to fight him at a disadvantage. Moreover, in high elo, players are much better at setting up freezes and controlling the wave to make those checkmate situations. Mundo can control and freeze the wave, but he either can't do it as freely or doesn't get that much mileage out of it. Draven's the same. While he and Misfortune are both lane bullies, Draven's advantage and disadvantage states are a lot better, while MF is more of a neutral focused marksman, giving him the option to be more proactive and responsive to favorable and unfavorable situations respectively. The difference between a Noob Stomper hypercarry and the High Elo hypercarry also has to do with the options they have at their disposal, especially in lane. Both Kayle and Gangplank scale like absolute monsters in the late game, but the former does worse than the latter in High Elo because there's not that much you can do in lane to make up for your early game deficiencies. Prior to level 6, Kayle is one of the weakest champions in the game, and even at level 6, you're sort of a glorified AD carry with a fancy ultimate. Fortunately, low elo players are less efficient at breaking you apart before you get the chance to scale, and with the average game length being a good 5 to 7 minutes longer, that's more games where you hit those crucial power spikes at level 11 and 16. As for Gangplank, while he's also relatively weak in the early game, the player can mitigate that weakness by making use of his powerful neutral game and area control. Using his Q and E, he can safely harass you in lane, wave clear, and establish zone control to allow him to safely farm. He might not be able to exactly kill you, but he stops you from killing him. More importantly, he can still impact the map through cannon barrage, so even if the enemy laner tries to roam, your team can be rest assured you still have some way to contribute. And in the mid to late game, he can transfer that zone control and neutral pressure to teamfights and other parts of the map, as opposed to Kayle, who only really brings damage. I'd argue in a contest of raw DPS, Kayle beats Gangplank without question, but he has more macro tools at his disposal. Both have a strong late game, but he has a more stable early game that ensures better consistency in surviving to late game, while Kayle doesn't. It only looks like she does because she gets away with more stuff than she would in High Elo. Proactivity is what it mostly boils down to. It's if the champion can do stuff with or without their opponent's say, and how well they can respond to changes in game state. In a neutral or a positive game state, do they have the means to push their advantage and get stuff done, assuming the player has the skill and knowledge to find those windows. Bard's a good support in High Elo because he can be proactive. And in a negative game state, can the player exercise a sufficient amount of damage control to reset back to neutral? Akshan's a good High Elo champion because he can revive teammates that get caught out, thus reversing the negative consequence of their mistake. That's the second big factor that differentiates a High Elo champion from a Noob Stomper: proactivity. Overall, the League is a multi-dimensional game, and there's no black and white criteria for how a champion should be designated. You can interpret a champion's ability to capitalize on mistakes as a sign they're really good in low elo where there are more mistakes. Or you can interpret their ability to capitalize on mistakes as a sign they're good in High Elo where there are less mistakes, therefore they can squeeze more value out of those few mistakes that someone else might not. It also has to do with experience and exposure. Down in low elo, when you run into Noob Stomper champs and they consistently perform well on average, that will make you want to play them, turning into a feedback loop to further that narrative. Same goes for High Elo. When you see a Draven going 15-1, two-shotting everybody, it makes people think Draven is super broken, which makes people want to play him and therefore give him more exposure. You might see Rel getting the cleanest 5-man WE ultimate for the Yasuo Wombo Penta and think, wow, that looks so broken, I should play her every time I have Yasuo on my team. The inverse can be true as well. You might get discouraged from playing tanks in High Elo because of the handful of games where your team goes 0-20 before you get a chance to even do anything, thus incentivizing you to want to play 1v9 solo champions like Rengar because you don't trust your team as far as you can throw them. Players influence other players to do stuff. We're all sheeple basically. Anyways, that's gonna be it for today. Let me know your thoughts on High Elo champions in the comments down below, whether you agree or disagree with my points. But as always, if you enjoyed the video, it would be great if you left a like and subscribed. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my Noob Stomper video if you haven't yet. Till next time though, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.